everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. We've got a pretty global community here online with us. We've got folks dropping in the chat box, letting us know where they're calling from. I'm gonna give you all a quick shout out before I pass the mic to our guest speaker. So we've got Quebec representing Salta, Argentina. We've got New York, Dallas, Texas, Athens, Greece, Ohio, Toronto, Argentina, Buenos Aires, Kentucky, Brooklyn, New York, Seattle, Denver, White Rock, BC, Pittsburgh, Pakistan, San Diego. Keep them coming, guys. Keep dropping in the chat box where you're calling from, and I'll give you all a shout out here shortly again if I see any new places popping up here in the chat. But I just want to say thank you all. We really appreciate you all joining for the next hour. I just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules before we get started so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. So we would love for you to participate, and you can participate in a number of ways. You can turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. This is a safe digital space, and we believe in visibility, so we'd love to have you turn your cameras on today. Of course, we know that digital fatigue and video fatigue are real, so no pressure there, but that is one way that you can participate. You can also participate by letting me know that you'd like to hop off mute. You can just write in the chat box, you can write to me privately, or you can raise your emoji hand and that will let me know that you'd like to hop off mute to voice a question or a reflection. I would also invite you all to, if you have any sensitive information and you would be preferred to be kept anonymous, you can write to me privately in the chat box under Mariella Marie. Write to me privately there, and I will keep you anonymous as I raise your question or your reflection to our guest speaker. And this is being recorded, so if I do give you permission to hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording. And everyone who signed up for this chat, be looking out for a rewatch email, as you will be receiving the link to this recorded video for you to share with your community, as well as links to any resources that our guest speaker might bring up throughout the hour. So be looking out for that rewatch email. And the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow Power to Fly on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. And if this is the first chat where you're participating and I'm moderating, I'd like to introduce myself briefly by just letting you know that I really love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace. So I might bring some of my reflections to that piece if anyone is interested on philosophizing on how we can be, some people call them soft skills, but I call them power skills. If anyone wants to philosophize or, add some active points on how we can demonstrate our emotional intelligence in the workplace, please drop those notes in the chat box or let me know that you'd like to hop off mute. I am working on the Positive Force team, and I'd love to invite you to support the project that I'm working on. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, or I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn, and be looking out because later on, I'm going to invite you all to drop your preferred ways of connecting in the chat box, whether that be your social medias, your LinkedIn's, your own websites or projects that you're working on, because I really think that this is a great opportunity for us to, start to practice what we preach and do some meaningful connections here in this digital space on this virtual event. So in just a few moments, go ahead and get your links ready, because I'm going to invite you all to drop those preferred links so you can network here today with us. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speaker, Camille, who's calling from San Francisco today. Camille, let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Yeah, so happy to be here, and thanks for the introduction. So hi, everybody. My name is Camille Merritt. I'm currently in San Francisco, and I'm the VP of our workplace software team here at Eden Workplace. If you haven't heard of Eden, we are a workplace management solution. So we have a number of different tools that help with the hybrid office, everything from desk booking to visitor management to ticketing systems. So it's a pretty comprehensive suite, really focused on that. And my team is primarily focused on growth, customer success, and product. So we really are focused on hearing what our clients need, understanding kind of the pain points that they're experiencing, and then implementing a solution for them, or working with our engineering team to build out different tools. So it's a pretty fun, dynamic team and role. I was a founding team member. I've been at the company actually for a little over 6 years. I was the first employee, and have kind of seen it all over the years, especially the last couple of years have been pretty interesting. And, outside of work, I have a dog named George. We hang around the Bay Area, but actually I'm seeing all these global folks on the call. I'm actually moving to London in a few weeks with my husband. So I'll really be leaning into the hybrid remote work life as an employee based out of London.
Beautiful, beautiful. So yes, it's so nice to see that we are a global community here. And I know that your notes for today's session are really going to be beneficial, of course, not only to yourself as you are making the transition soon, but also for all of our live callers today. So actually, I just want to move on to this next slide here that talks about the principal themes for today's conversation. So Camille, let us know what you plan on covering today.
Yeah, so we have a ton of questions that we're going to go through and lots of talking points, but really the big themes here are around addressing the demand for flexibility. That's really what's driving a lot of decisions around the office and workplace today. Focusing on reopening in a safe way. There's been a lot of people have had a lot. There's just been a lot of stuff that's happened the last couple of years, and that's impacted everyone in different ways. So really trying to think about all the ways that teams can approach safety across a group of employees and really humans. And then creating great culture and really thinking about what are the different tools and policies and procedures that can go into place to make sure that offices have hybrid offices can really lean into that company culture and not lose anything along the way.
Awesome. So you all have submitted some great questions previous to this conversation. So I'm actually just going to stop sharing my screen now to pull up these awesome questions that you all have submitted. And again, if anyone has any, last minute questions they'd like to add to the flow, or if anything comes to mind as Camille is responding to these questions, please use the chat box to drop those last minute questions in so that we can make sure we get your questions answered in this hour. And actually, before we start, I remember I said in our introduction, I want to invite you all to start to network. So please use this time to drop your preferred ways of connecting in the chat box, whether that be your LinkedIn, your websites, or your portfolios, anything that you're excited to share with us today so that we can make sure that we're networking here. And actually, Camille, when this conversation ends, what is the preferred way that you'd like folks to connect with you?
Yeah, I can drop my LinkedIn in the chat, and then email is great. So I'll make sure to put both of those in there.
Great. And then for those who are rewatching this conversation who might not have access to the chat, do you mind saying that with your voice, actually?
Yeah. So my email, it's pretty easy. It's just Camille@EdenWorkplace.com. It's just my first name at EdenWorkplace.com. And then Camille Merritt, if you just look me up on LinkedIn, it should be pretty quick to find.
Great, great. All right, so let's start with this first question here as folks are dropping their preferred ways of connecting in the chat box. So what benefits do company have going hybrid versus working from the office? Are you seeing any new perks, benefits being offered or explored, for example, remote work stipends, et cetera?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think there are a ton of benefits for like the hybrid office, just generally. You're really able to give people a little bit of separation, that flexibility. If you need to work from home, maybe you have a meeting at like you have like a personal event at 4:30 and it's just not worth it to go into the office and come back. You're saving that time. Or if you really need heads down work, maybe a no meeting day where you're uninterrupted, that's where that home office can really be really beneficial. But there are a ton of perks from being in the office too, of course. Just the social elements of it, being able to connect with people who maybe you don't get to talk to day in and day out. So kind of having that balance can go a really long way, I think, for employees just generally. But as far as perks and new benefits, I think teams are getting really creative, having a lot of fun with this and trying to make really rethink what is a perk for an employee. Whereas before, maybe you had a fully stocked kitchen. Folks are thinking about having, a snack budget, or maybe you get a snack box sent to your home instead. I've seen home office stipends being a really big thing recently, letting people kind of reimagine that home office, whether it's getting a new chair or lamps or even like plants for your office, allowing people to really make sure that they can build out a place where they feel productive and can work well. The other thing I've heard pretty recently that's becoming more popular are shorter weeks. So this is actually something Eden recently implemented. We just implemented half-day Fridays, just going forward forever. So 36-hour week. And this has had such a huge impact on our team's morale and even productivity. Folks are super engaged during the week. They get things done. If for whatever reason their Friday ends up being a little busier, there are no meetings, it's like pretty much free time to use for whatever you like. And we found that our employees are happier. We're not seeing things slip in terms of our customer happiness or like our product turnout, things like that. And yeah, it's been a great perk. I saw a question about how that affects health coverage. Right now, our employees are all salaried W-2 employees. So I don't think it's had an effect there. For our hourly employees, they are still all kind of covered under whatever. We do have a few folks on our support team. And I believe they're still all covered under kind of like, they're still treated as a full-time employee. So it hasn't had an impact.
Very interesting. Thank you for that question, Amy, in the chat. And thanks for Camille for seeing that question and just kind of effortlessly lacing that into your response. Any tips for companies who might be on the fence about, maybe cutting down their hours? I mean, I gave you the emoji applause on that because I think that that's a really interesting way to, be new in the space as far as changing things up in an intentional way to make sure that people can, have more time for their wellness and just be supported in that and being psychologically safe in the space, and having that time off to do whatever they need to do to come back full force. If companies are on the fence about, that because maybe they say, they're not going to be, our employees aren't going to be as productive, or we're not going to meet, whatever goals they have, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, we grappled with the same thing. This was not like an overnight change that we implemented. For us, we kind of did it in a few phases. We first did summer Fridays, which I think is relatively popular among a lot of companies. So we said, okay, throughout the summer between like in the US, Memorial Day and Labor Day, Fridays are half day. It was really popular. People loved it, and that was going to be the new perk. With COVID and a lot of the kind of just mental health, like stress we were seeing among our employees, we decided in Q4, hey, let's just make this happen through Q4 for the rest of the year. And as a management team, we said, let's measure this. Let's be really intentional about seeing, does this impact productivity? Are we seeing any kind of adverse effects from this? And we just took a quarter and we told the team, hey, this is one quarter. We're just going to do this for the end of the year. We took that quarter to really measure and see how things were going. And at the end of the year, we did a survey among our managers to say, hey, what are you seeing? Is any, what's working, what's not working? And it was overwhelmingly positive. And so that's when we implemented it. So we definitely didn't just like dive in head first. It was pretty much, it was a bit of a process. And I think the other thing that we've really had to think through carefully with that is making sure that, especially as managers, not overstepping those boundaries. So if I prefer my half day to be in the afternoon and the rest of my team is offline, I need to be careful that I'm not pinging people on Slack all, over and over and like bombarding people with emails. So we do have to be really careful about not overstepping and kind of like stressing people out and making them feel like, oh, it's a half day, but it's not real. So it does take some discipline there.
Great. And I see some more questions popping up in the chat, but I'll get to that in just a moment. I want to cover some of the previously submitted questions before we get to the live questions here. So let's move on to this one here. Should we use the survey by employees' concerns or requests before we develop our new policies? Or is it smarter to give them org-approved options first rather than opening the floodgates to ideas that are non-starters? And I think this is a nice question to approach after your previous response.
Yeah. And I think you cut it just for 1 second. So just the first part of the question is, should we use a survey to identify employees' concerns or requests before developing policies? So should you open up those floodgates up front or not? I'm in the camp of that it's okay to send out that survey. I think your survey can be structured in a way where there's kind of like some built-in parameters to avoid maybe a huge waterfall of just non-starter ideas. If you know that your office is going to be hybrid, you're going to have an office, you're going to have people on site, don't send a survey that says, would you prefer to be a 100% remote? Like if it's not an option, just don't even give give it to folks. And if you're worried that people might feel like they're boxed in some way or whatever, you can always add a catch-all question. Do you have any other ideas? Do you have any other thoughts? And that text box can really go a long way. And you may actually find people have some really great ideas that were never considered. I also think when you're rolling this stuff out, it's super helpful to remind your employees that you're in early stages and there are no bad ideas. However, it's not always possible to accommodate all of that feedback because somebody might say, we should be in the office 80% of the time. Somebody might say 20% of the time, and you need to find that balance. And so reminding people, hey, we're taking this information, and as a leadership team or as an HR team or whoever's in that committee, you're doing what's best for the broader company and those employees. And I think the last point here, it's just important to kind of like understand what your team thinks is important. So you can always consider asking people to stack rank ideas or kind of like provide input as you are going along. What are the early stage ideas? What are the later stage ideas? It doesn't have to be one survey and then you're done, right? You can kind of keep touching base with folks and iterating through those ideas.
Great. I love that thoughtful response. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How do you ensure a balance between employees' demands for flexibility and the company's needs in terms of teamwork?
Yeah, this is a hard one. And it's definitely a tricky one because like at some point there will be a policy for your organization and it may not be perfect for everybody. And that's true for any policy, right? That's not just hybrid, that's anything you implement. Somebody may not love it or somebody, will want to change it. I think the key here is really transparent communication, especially among teams. And giving people flexibility is really great. But depending on your company's values, you may really need to think about what needs to be prioritized, what are the roles that employees are in, and like what's going to make them successful in that role, and what is the culture you're trying to build. Sometimes it's just not reasonable to accept certain flexibility requests. An example, I manage our sales team. If one of my AEs said, I want to move, I'm going to go backpack through Southeast Asia, and I need them to be online for our clients in the US, I can't tell them, okay, no problem, you can work local time in Southeast Asia. It just wouldn't work for their role. So I think being able to set those parameters is going to be really important. And the same thing goes for maybe an engineer or a product team. If you need to be able to collaborate and everybody's on one time zone, you may need to ask folks to kind of bend and flex to that. And I personally have my own situation moving to London. I have a US based team. I'm going to be working modified hours in order to overlap and make sure that we can collaborate and work together still. But at the end of the day, it comes down to kind of setting a policy, sticking to it. There will probably be exceptions, and that's okay. But I think as long as you're being transparent, helping people understand the why behind whatever it is that you're doing. No, you can't work in Southeast Asia local time because all of your clients are in San Francisco. Telling people that, it's going to create a lot more buy-in as opposed to just saying, here's the rule and do it because I say so.
Great. And actually have a private question here. Aren't options for work remote, hybrid, on-site, role-based? I'd love for you to speak to that because I bet some people, post, hybrid flex and things are changing all the time. So as someone is applying, what should they look out for?
Yeah, I kind of lost you at the very beginning. Do you mind saying it one more time?
Yes, sorry about that. So I have a private message asking about role-based, like how to tell if something is work remote or hybrid based on the role. So can you just speak to what people should look out for when they're applying, what kind of keywords when they're applying for different roles so that they can prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is going to be on the hiring manager in defining that job as well. If your hiring manager says like, I don't care what time you work, and they're cool with that and it's cool with their team, I think, you can give them some of that autonomy to make the call. But there are certain roles that do require more office time. If you have, maybe a facilities manager and you have a campus and you need that person to be on site, it's pretty important that that's written into the job description and that it's really agreed upon before anything gets started. I think where you might run into some trouble is if somebody joins thinking that they're in a remote role and you say, hey, you have to be in the office 4 days a week. So it's really, I think, just transparency up front.
And I love that you keep touching back to transparency. I mean, from your introduction, just that has been like a key point in working this way. Transparency is key.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like in the past, I've been burned by just saying, hey, this is the rule, let's just follow it. Like, people just don't respond to that in the long run.
All right, so let's move on to this question here. From an HR perspective, what are some best practices we can share with team leads to help them manage the hybrid teams effectively? How can we casually check in with staff and management without making them feel like HR is hovering?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one thing that's really important is that it's not all on HR. It's not all on people ops to make this happen. You have team managers, you have team leads, you have an executive team, and they all play a role in making sure that this is something adopted across the organization. So I think kind of first and foremost is making sure you're training up the other leaders within your organization to make sure they're checking in regularly with their team. Do they have weekly one-on-ones? Are they creating space to just like have a hangout? On my team, for example, every Friday, we do brunch in Salesforce where we literally just sit down together. People update Salesforce. We like grab some coffee. We chat about nothing. And there's basically no agenda. And that can go a long way just for having that unstructured time to kind of like hang out and work together. And I think kind of like incorporating those little things go a long way from a management perspective. Obviously, HR and people ops do play a huge role in all of this. We have a wonderful head of people named Jenna, and she does some really cool things where, for example, she'll just like out of the blue Slack people and say, hey, how are you? How's your day? How's your week? And like, that's it. It's just kind of a regular check-in, no agenda, nothing's wrong. It's just like a hi from Jenna. And it creates this opportunity to create kind of like ongoing conversations with folks, giving people that open door to say like, oh, I can always reach out to Jenna and say, hi, she's here for me. And then if something does come up because there's a concern, there's a question, it's not awkward for her to be like, oh, I haven't talked to this person before, I'm going to ping them right now. So it does kind of like keep that ongoing communication. The other thing is that, when brand new employees start and they're just getting up and running, like she'll set up, and other people do this too, but she'll set up multiple checkpoints during their first week and their first month to see how they're doing, really creating that open door policy. And then I think the last piece is we have, and I think a lot of other companies have this, we have EAGs and DEI groups that are really led by employees within the organization, and getting them to participate, have a buddy in the org, create mentorship is another way to kind of like make sure people are just touching base and seeing how everybody's feeling, and being comfortable sharing that with managers and leaders in HR too.
Great. Thank you for that thoughtful response. And I love that the casual check-ins, what's her name again that you have?
Jenna,
Jenna friendly check-ins or something. You said something and I was like, we should put that on a t-shirt. That sounded really nice and friendly. It's like, just coming by to see how you're doing, have a cup of tea in with you.
Yeah, no, she's so good at it. And she's really all about kind of like wellness and people's mental health. So and not take like she's the kind that doesn't take herself too seriously. So she's just jumping in and saying like, oh, I heard you really like that, this band. Have you heard of this? Like, she's really finding ways to connect with people beyond just work.
I love that. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty gritty. I love this question that was submitted previously. Also, if you're here and you hear your question come up, let us know that you submitted this question. So how do you communicate to remote employees that they must return to the office without it affecting them emotionally and negatively?
Yeah, it's we've had 2 years almost of people working from home. So this is a big one that a lot of people are figuring out. from my perspective, I really think it comes down to setting logical and reasonable expectations. Something I saw in December, for example, is that companies were calling employees back to the office, but then they were canceling holiday parties. And they were saying, we can't have a holiday party. It's not safe. Oh, but you need to be in the office. And as an employee, you're going to be like, wait, why? Like, I can't socialize with my coworkers, but I can like sit in the office next to them. So if you're if you're implementing more or less like an illogical plan like that, then people are going to feel bad. It's going to be like, this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing this? So I think really explaining why, hey, we're doing this because we want people to be able to meet. We are doing this because we have a lot of new employees who have never even had a chance to like see each other's faces. And we want to foster that collaboration. Like, you're going to get that better response. And I think also just making sure people know, hey, if you're not comfortable, if you do need to work from home a couple of days a week or, whatever it is, giving people that option and not kind of just like drawing a hard line. Because I think that's where you're going to get a lot of pushback from folks.
Great, great. I love that response. And actually, this is a good segue into this next question here. I've noticed that a challenge in transitioning from pre-pandemic office culture to hybrid remote is training employees to change their behavior around use of the office. For example, adhering to sign-up procedures, use of space with social distancing in mind, being respectful of the overall need to be more mindful in the physical space. What are some tools to help employees modify their behavior to this new setup?
Yeah, this is something our team hears a lot. It's kind of like every day we're talking to our clients about this. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, this is another one that I think comes down to kind of that transparency. If you set a policy with no logic to it or no reason behind it, I think you'll find people kind of roll their eyes and just keep going. But if you're like, hey, we're doing this because of, even if it's because this is what the local government requires, or if we're doing it because it's for team safety or whatever, I think you'll get more responses from that. As far as what to implement, I think signage, training materials are really great. Making sure that you're saying, hey, we're doing this for the team health to make sure we don't go over capacity in the office, maybe because your company is trying to save some money and you're being resourceful with your space, right? Just sharing that sort of information with your employees. It's a good thing to share. And obviously we're a little biased, but Eden is one of those tools that a lot of folks have been implementing around this to help with desk booking, with tracking vaccine status, with tracking visitor management, things like that. And I think you can also create visual cues to supplement that software. So for example, we have an iPad app, and when you set it up, you can have it so at your front door, it reminds people, hey, if you're an employee, don't forget to check in. So if I walk in and I go, oh shoot, I forgot to fill out my survey, I've got like that visual cue right in front of me. So things like that, I think, will help people adhere a little bit closer. There's also some really cool things you can do with software if you have like access control tools like Brevo or OpenPath for your front door. You can implement those into your different software that help kind of badge control. So people are following those rules just through like an automated system.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to this next one here. What is the best way to help older generations feel comfortable using virtual and hybrid work environments?
Yeah, I like this question. I thought it was a funny question, but I like it. So I actually, before I was at Eden, I actually worked in the education space and I was a teacher at a middle school. And I think one of like the big things I learned is that not everyone learns the same way. And so being able to approach people with information in different ways is going to be really important, especially for such a big change. And I think this is true for everyone, not just older generations, but it could apply however. So I think one is you can't just send a Slack message and say, here's the policy and be like, all right, I'm good. There need to be training materials and they need to be accessible to different types of learners. So maybe you do send the Slack message, but you have a newsletter and it's always reiterated in the newsletter. Maybe there's a video training of how it goes, a help center. You have help center articles for your clients, I'm sure in many of your companies, having internal kind of like help center articles for your employees. And even kind of tapping into those like EAG and DEI groups to set up office hours, create mentor connections and like buddies and one-on-ones, I think will help people kind of like adopt across the board.
Great. I want to tackle some of these questions here that are coming up in the chat box that speak specifically to workplace injuries. So I have one question here. From the hybrid work point of view, how do you help employees reduce the risk of injuries, health and safety while working from home? In British Columbia, Canada, if an employee is working at home and gets injured, you may have some liability on it. For instance, if the employee trips on cables at home. So that's one question there. I'll stop there and I'll have you respond to that if you can.
Yeah, I honestly, I might not be the best one for this. I didn't actually know that about BC Canada, so that's good to know. I'm curious. I'm actually curious if the group has anything, because I'm not totally sure. Or I'm happy to bring this back to our team and share it as a follow-up question or follow-up answer too.
That's great. That's great. Actually, yes, if anyone has any, any experience or tips and tricks, please drop that in the chat box. Otherwise, maybe in that rewatch email, we can add some links to resources there so that folks can find out something that you all have discovered on your team.
Yeah. One thing I did see the question about like equipment for remote employees. It says, so if folks missed it, how do you do with like equipment for remote employees if something's broken, if there's a delivery, repair, et cetera. A couple of thoughts about this. I think for your teams, you can have that budget, right? And this may apply to like somebody tripping over a cable. You can have that budget for the home office to say, hey, I need you to buy cable organizers, and like this is how it should be set up to kind of teach people about health and safety from that regard. And then more for like your laptop breaks or you need something fixed or whatever, really great ticketing tools can go a long way here to make sure you're tracking where everything is, knowing which equipment is at home versus in the office, using that from like an asset management standpoint. And I think it's going to be important for whoever manages at your IT team, or I know sometimes HR managers, the sense of falling in your laps, but having kind of that backup where you can ship something out really quickly, send somebody down to, if you're using Macs, run down to the Apple store to get a supplement in the short term, but kind of having that like contingency plan can be really helpful.
Great follow-up question here. I am concerned about using my personal computer for work as I don't think it could handle it. Are companies giving work computers?
Our company does. We are actually not allowed to use a personal computer for work. It's really not something we encourage. So I would talk to your team. I'd talk to your kind of like company about that, but I would expect that they would at least try to give you some sort of equipment if that's what's required to do your day-to-day.
Great. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. This one speaks more to communication. How to fill the space between staff where conversations and information would organically help us all to work in sync when some are working virtually while others are at the office? Yeah,
this is definitely one of the trickier parts of the hybrid model. And I'm, won't sugarcoat that. And, unfortunately, like sometimes that organic interaction, if you're in person versus at home, it might get lost. And that is just kind of the reality of it. There are things you can do to try to mitigate some of that. And that's investing in really great AV in your conference rooms, maybe having, if there's, some people in the office and some people remote, maybe ask everybody to join the Zoom call so that it's not like a big room of people together, and like a handful of people on Zoom is another way to go about that. Or even just setting up kind of like, again, those like casual hangouts where maybe some people jump on Zoom and they're in the kitchen and anybody who comes through the kitchen can say hi. But yeah, I like Amy's response. Yeah, camera on the water cooler. So I think those are all options, but I also think that this is an important thing to think about and to remind your employees, hey, if you're giving folks the option, you can be remote or go in the office. These are maybe some of the limitations you could run into. You may not meet as many people at the office. You may not have as much of that like social time. And if you're craving that as an employee, you may really want to encourage them to at least come into the office a few days a week or even a few days a month.
Great, great. Amber writes a question here in the public chat. I'm going to go to the question first and just give a little bit of background there. How can you communicate effectively between two or more offices when so many shoulder tap conversations happen? So Amber says that she's interested in the hybrid environment of having two in-person offices that work and communicate remotely between each other.
Yeah, I think this is another thing of just really pushing for communication among teams. And I noticed it. I was in the office the other day with one of our new employees, and he was literally sitting next to me, and I Slacked him a message, and he looked at me and was like, "Why did you Slack that to me? I'm right here." And I was like, "I don't know. I think I just wanted everyone to see like what we were talking about." And so, I think if people are having those conversations, could really encourage, hey, maybe send, if it's relevant to your team or to other people, maybe send a quick recap in writing. And hey, it's not bad for that team who had that in-person conversation to maybe have it written down too. So I think there are different ways that you can say, oh, if that was a insightful, important conversation that happened, put it somewhere in a team channel or whatever, to make sure that people don't miss out on that like big message. But I agree. It's definitely one of the challenges of hybrid, and it won't be perfect.
But it's that experimental piece that you were mentioning before. It's like, try it, see what happens for a month after you suggest a new way to make sure that everyone is being heard or that new things are being shared, especially with new members and things like that. So I think experimenting is key, and having that grace period happen throughout that portion.
Totally. Yeah. Iterate away.
Okay, so you are diving in deep here, but let's go back to the basics. So this first question is going to have us go all the way back from scratch. So for companies entirely new to remote or hybrid workers, can you provide some ideas on how to develop a more remote culture from scratch?
Yeah, we definitely ran, and I know a ton of companies did. We definitely had to approach this from scratch ourselves, and I think our team's done a really good job of implementing tools and policies to help our team adapt from that transition. A few things that we've done, we've created a really strong like buddy system. Everybody has like their friend who's not on their direct team that they can connect with and build rapport. So, somebody on engineering might be buddies with somebody on finance, and it just gives people to chat outside of that direct team. Even for people who've been at the company for a long time, I think you can still create that buddy system. So it's not just for new hires. EAGs, I know I've mentioned this a couple times. It really goes a long way, not only for like coming up, understanding what's important for employees, but also, making sure that they are contributing to the culture. It's not just a top-down process. So that's a big one. Engagements and gifts and things like that. Like we'll get every once in a while, we get like a surprise snack box, and like it's so little, it like costs nothing, and it goes such a long way in making people happy. Oh, EAG is Employee Action Group. So it's like just a group of employees that are contributing to the culture in some way. And then DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have both of those groups at our company. I talked about this a little bit, allocating budget to remote work.
Sorry, I have a sure. I had a quick question because I've never heard of EAGs. I love this. I've heard, of course, of ERGs, and I love the of course actionable part of action in EAG. Can you explain maybe the difference between the two, if there is one?
Yeah, so an ERG, employee resource group, right? Yeah, I think it's actually relatively similar. The way I think, especially as companies get bigger and bigger, the resource groups tend to be focused on maybe like a specific thing. Maybe you really love whatever, I'm going to make up something silly. You love action movies, and like you want to share that with the company. And EAG tends to be a little bit broader, at least with our org, and they're kind of giving input on like, what are we doing in our team retreat? Do half-day Fridays work? Like they're almost like more strategic and kind of a group that is giving advice to our HR team. Yeah. Cool. And then, I think just other things, as you're thinking about culture, just being really thoughtful about how your meetings are going to work in a virtual setting. How can people contribute? Is it okay to interrupt the speaker while they're talking? Like setting those norms are going to help a lot, especially when your team is going to have more and more meetings. So Zoom chat, using like emojis to say like, I agree or whatever, and opening up space for like questions, comments, discussion. I think when you set those norms up front, they're going to help a lot. I did related to this question. Actually, our team wrote a blog about this, so I'll throw that in the chat. And it has a lot of these points too that you're welcome to check out.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And we'll make sure to include that in the rewatch email as well.
Sorry, I sent it just to Jody. I will send it to everybody.
All right, great, perfect. Thank you for that link. All right, so let's move on to the next question here. How do you achieve equity, remote versus in person, with limited financial resources?
Yeah, I think this one I was thinking about a little bit. And I think it's a lot of like adapting your space to accommodate maybe smaller, like the in-person space, to accommodate smaller groups. Pivoting those in-office perks that maybe you were spending money on before, maybe changing those so that they support more of that remote culture. Maybe you get rid of the fully stocked kitchen and change that to everyone gets a monthly stipend. We do a wellness stipend. So maybe it's a monthly stipend where you can go get a massage, or you can do whatever little thing is going to make you feel really good. But I think what's important here is if you're going to have some of those in-office perks, think about how you can just balance them across folks who maybe aren't in the office as much, or just pulling back a little bit. I think before COVID, this pandemic, it was like offices had just, you didn't need to leave your office. You could live there and have everything you need. And so I think you can probably pull back some of that budget and apply it to maybe some of those like health and wellness things that are going to help people feel good about being at home.
Yes, it's kind of like shifting the focus instead of welcoming everyone back with, the bells and whistles and full fridge and, decorations everywhere. It's like save some of that funding for like, I love this wellness stipend that you're mentioning.
Yeah, I think one thing too, though, that you don't want the office to be boring. Like if you want people in the office, you can't like strip it down to nothing and give people a desk and a monitor. So it's certainly a balance. Like if people want cold brew, give them the cold brew, like it's okay. But maybe you don't have to go as far.
Yes, finding that fine line, the balance, as you said, between how to speak to both sides. I love that.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move to this next question here. How do we ensure employees working remotely are considered for career progression if leaders don't interact with the employee on the daily basis? Yeah,
I know a lot of people think about this, especially early career employees. Like this is certainly a risk. I think there's a few things that HR teams can do specifically around this and implement some rules. So one, really training your managers and team leads to make sure that you're having career conversations and performance reviews with all employees, and that there's like a regular template for it. It shouldn't be like, oh, I see you in person, let's like chat and walk around the block and talk about it. Like everybody should kind of like have the same methodology for how they're reviewed and given feedback. When it comes to promotions, internal moves, et cetera, your people team, your HR team should be very involved in that to make sure that it does ensure objectivity, inclusion, and that you're kind of like following a rubric or a playbook so that you're not like, I just really like this person. We get lunch every Friday. It's super fun. Let's give them a promotion. Like that's not good enough. There has to be some sort of like process. And then I think the last thing is that even if an employee is remote, they live across the country, whatever, that they get regular face time with leadership. And obviously this is going to change depending on the scale of your company. If you're a smaller organization, making sure there are, one-on-ones with your CEO even, or your executive team on, it can even just be a quarterly basis. Doesn't have to be all the time. Making sure your HR team or your people team are checking in on a regular basis, and your managers really should have a pretty consistent cadence. We do weekly one-on-ones, so nobody's really like left behind there.
And being proactive about it too, because things can go so quickly, so fast. And then maybe, a couple months have passed and you haven't had a one-on-one with anyone, especially if you're dealing with a bigger team. So making sure that you reach out at least to a manager or someone who can, advocate for you essentially when that time comes.
Yeah, totally. I think also like HR teams can really make sure that job postings are shared internally, even maybe before they're posted externally. Like these are just like all little things, but it definitely helps with that transparency.
All right, so let's move on to this next question here. Do you think that there will be any employment law cases brought against companies if employees are forced to go back to office working?
So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to answer this with my personal opinion. It is not legal advice, just so folks know. My personal take is that, sure, I mean, people could sue, I suppose, but as long as companies have their expectations written down and it's consistent, it's relatively unlikely to be successful. If a lawsuit is brought in, we actually did we did a webinar with Fenwick and West, who's a global law firm, about can you track vaccines in the office? And what he kind of consistently said was like, as a business, you can make the rules. If you say every day you have to wear a tie to the office, I can't be sued. Like, you can't sue my company because I made you wear a tie every day. And if I say, hey, our company rules are you have to come and sit in this seat every single day, you can't sue me for making that a rule. Now, if your local government says everyone should shelter in place and no one should go into the office, like maybe it gets a little dicey there. But at the end of the day, companies make their policies. And if you don't like it, like, employees can leave. And maybe it's a bad policy and you have terrible company culture, but like, that's a different issue. It's not a legal one.
Yeah, that's a completely different chat that we'd need a whole another hour for, probably.
Yeah. And I can try to find that webinar if people want to check it out. It was pretty good.
All right. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I just want everyone to know. So if you've got any last minute questions or reflections, please add those to the chat box. Otherwise, I've got one more question that you all have submitted previous to this conversation left. So please, drop any last minute questions or reflections in the chat, and we'll try to get those answered before our next 10 minutes are up. All right. So final question here. Should orgs be paying for items for employees who choose to permanently work from home? For example, part of their Wi-Fi, or provide a monitor, keyboard, desk, chair, etc. I'm thinking specifically of situations where we allow an employee to decide if they want to work from home 100% of the time, and they decide yes. We provide this stuff if they came into the office, so are we obligated to provide it if they work from home by choice?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the last question. You're not obligated to. There was no requirement to say, hey, well, now that you're not commuting anymore, you're giving me your extra hour. Like, does that balance out? Like, you don't have to do that. It's certainly a nice perk. And I think it's something that it can be a pretty small, a small like thing. Even if you say everybody gets $100 to upgrade their home office with some like small things, like that does help people feel good, feel like they're being thought about. And it does impact their productivity. So I think it's more like weighing, how is this going to make this employee happy and productive at my organization? So I think that's maybe the kind of lens to look at this at, but I don't think there's any like, you must do this. It's not an obligation.
Great. Thank you for that response. So we've got Amanda who writes, please post the policy webinar I mentioned.
Yeah, I got it. Let me send it.
And if you can't grab it now, we're happy to put that in the rewatch email as well. But you're so fast, Camille, you've already found it. So great. She's already dropped that into the chat. So make sure to take a look at that. And we have a question here from Poma. How can we be equitable across hourly manufacturing folks who really cannot do their jobs remotely versus salary folks who can? Any specific policies, perks, suggestions?
Yeah, that is certainly, there are certain roles that you just have to be in person. You can't like fix the wiring and not go look at the wiring. So I think this is, again, kind of weighing, like, what are the things that you're giving your remote employees that you can carry over to those hourly employees. Maybe it is, like, I keep saying cold brew, but having the like great cold brew and like snack budget for those in-person employees that you are providing to remote folks. You could think about, are there floating half days? Are there floating days off that folks get that have to go into the office to make up for their commute time? So you can certainly think about those policies, and your policies do not have to be the same for somebody that's required to be in the office and that can be remote. You can have policies by team. And I think just setting those rules and saying, like, we're doing this because, they don't get this flexibility or whatever. You could go, I think people would really appreciate that.
Great. So it looks like Poma again writes, we did add 2 floating holidays. Great advice and thanks for the answers. A follow-up question here. Also, some leaders have transitioned well to the more democratic access in a virtual only collaborative workspace in facilitating group work, but some folks really just want to push back to in-person where the louder, more aggressive voices get more precedence. How can we get our management team's skill sets up to snuff?
It's a long question. Sorry, I'm just reading it again. I think if I'm,
I guess in the case that leaders aren't able to transition well, is what I'm assuming. How can the management be trained? Can I throw one in here too?
Yeah,
maybe some equity and emotional intelligence training, because actually Camille, when you were speaking about, like, empathy is ringing out to some of these responses. Like, how would you like if you were in that person's shoes, what would you need to be, to be feeling like you're in a space where belonging is actually, being practiced and your voice is being heard and included. And so I think there's so many beautiful, brilliant minds now who have seen the necessity for diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're creating these beautiful equity trainings and emotional intelligence trainings. And I think that would just be something that I would throw at leaders to definitely, make time to train their managers, train their skills. Sorry for this question here, for the management's team skill sets to go up there with equity training or emotional intelligence. But Camille, what would you say?
No, I actually totally agree with you. I think also make them make a case. Why are you doing this? Like, have them write a memo that says, I'm doing this, and here are like the business cases for why it makes sense, and really make somebody think through their decision, their policy before they actually implement it.
Yes, and we've got some follow-up questions here. Are there any equity training suggestions? I'll throw them in the chat box because I know that now, Camille, I'm going to let you take the last 5 minutes here to let us know what you all are working on and what you're excited to share with our community today.
Yeah, for sure. I know I gave the quick high level on Eden earlier, but we are software for the hybrid office, and we're building out tools that are really focused on employee experience. That's our really big kind of push over the coming several years up ahead. We are offering a little perk for everybody that joined the webinar. So I'll drop it in the chat. If you are interested and book a demo and join the demo with our team, we'll send you a Starbucks gift card. So feel free to grab that if you are interested. And if you'd like to connect, I'll also put my information in the chat, and I'd be happy to connect with anybody.
Great. And can you just let us know, I'm just curious to have you do some shameless plugging as well, but I'm just curious also to know more, what What is your ideal? I mean, I know you've talked a lot about what you all, what your beliefs are, what your purpose is, what your mission is at Eden. But if you could think of like the utopia for like, hybrid or remote teams, how would you envision that? And of course, using the tools that and the resources that you're suggesting today.
Yeah, I think in my what I've like been predicting, and I think hope it comes true someday, is that I think people will be in the office probably 2 to 3 days a week, and people will have the flexibility to work from home 2 to 3 days a week, and that in office time will be really focused on collaboration, getting to know your team, getting. I know I crave face to face time, and I'm always so happy when I see my coworkers, and I think it'll really foster those relationships. While kind of like on the flip side, if you wake up and you're like, I'm too tired, I just like can't do it today, giving people that flexibility to come in. And so I do think that will continue. I also think that we'll see shorter work weeks really becoming the norm. I think we're going to see a lot more companies start to adopt that, as well as kind of like the work from anywhere vacation, 4 weeks and go work from, Mexico or something for a little bit. I think that will continue to be more popular and accepted. So here's hoping.
Awesome. So thank you so much for just dropping a lot of knowledge in this past hour. Time has flown by, and you've dropped so much knowledge already, but can you just leave us with some food for thought, some more food for thought? You gave us your utopia. What if someone is on the fence about, should I apply? Should I not? I'm afraid I've never worked, virtually before, or maybe they're ready for that in-person kind of thing. Can you speak to that specific person who's on the fence?
Yeah, I think just remember that this is a big experiment that we're all running together, and to keep iterating. If your policy doesn't work as you expected the first time, change it and listen to your employees, and make things better. Like nothing should be set in stone on day one. And I think as long as you keep that flexibility in mind, it'll help you kind of navigate this like, new workplace environment.
Absolutely. So folks are singing your praises in the chat, saying thank you so much for dropping knowledge, for sharing with us today. Good luck, everyone. I appreciate everyone joining today's conversation. Camille, thank you so much again for sharing your resources, and be looking out for the rewatch email that we're going to send to you all who joined this conversation. We'll make sure to include the links to the resources that Camille dropped in the chat box there. So thank you all so much. Good luck with everything. Let's experiment with equity, with emotional intelligence, and let's bring our authentic selves to the table. We've got so much opportunity to do things differently. And I love that Camille is, inspiring that change. So thank you, everyone.